Welcome back to learning Revit structure. In this lesson, we'll cover work sharing. So let's say you work at a firm or within a company where you have multiple people working on this Revit project. One method of sharing data could be that I work on this Revit file and then I could save it and someone else could open the file, work on it, save it, and they could keep going, save, open, but you're really not working collaboratively, meaning that everyone is opening their own instance whenever no one else is opening it. Or you could work on separate projects and then start importing, exporting elements into one actual file. That works, but it's not the best collaborative method. The best collaborative method is to use work sharing. In work sharing, you set up a central file first. Then from that central file, users are created their own little Revit projects, which is basically a copy of the central file. The key is those copies for the users then synchronize changes back to that central file. So you could have 10, 15, multiple people working on this Revit project, all of who have a copy of the central file. So when they add things, remove things, it's synchronized to the central file and then synchronized out to everyone else. So everyone is constantly kept up to date. Now, it could be everybody in structure working on the structural elements, or it could be across multiple disciplines, such as mechanical, electrical, plumbing, architecture, and structural, maybe even civil. So the first step is actually to set up a central file for work sharing. Now, what we opened here, this is basically just a Revit project. Typically, when you're setting up work sharing, you'd start to set this up before you even created anything within the file. But you can also do it now after something's been created. So this is just a normal standalone Revit file we opened. Now the first step to creating the central file is to define work sets. So to define work sets, let's go to the Collaborate tab on your ribbon. All the way to the left, click Work Sets. Now Revit by default is going to create a work set for levels and grids. It's going to name it Work Set 1. You could leave it Work Set 1, or we could change it to levels and grids. That's up to you. In this case, I'm changing this to levels and grids, and then click OK. Now, what Revit will do is start to prepare a work set. And as it's preparing the work set, you may say, well, what is a work set? Well, a work set is the way to categorize all of the things you do within Revit. So let's say I'm going to work on columns. Well, I should create a work set for columns. Or let's say I am the mechanical engineer working on mechanical elements. Well, maybe I make a work set for mechanical that covers a broad range of things. But you can make these work sets as finite or minuscule as you want, or it could cover a broad range. Now we're looking at the work set categories. Right now there's two, levels and grids, and then shared levels and grids. Let's create a few more. So on the right, click New. Let's call this new work set columns. So this would be for anybody that was going to work on columns, they would make sure that's the active work set. So all those columns are grouped together in this work set. Click New again, and let's create one for beams. And then we'll add another one, maybe for floors. And then let's say you had other disciplines, such as architecture. So I could say architectural, and maybe one for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So as you can see, you can make these work sets as finite as you want or as broad as you want. More than one person can work on a work set. They can contribute as much as they want. It's just that everything they do is tagged or grouped within that work set. So now looking at this screen, you have several columns. The name is pretty clear. That's the name of the work set. But editable is set to yes right now because I'm creating this. Now what editable actually means is that if it's editable, only me, the owner, can actually edit or contribute or modify anything within that work set. It's good and bad. The good side is if my project is under a design review, I'm going to take ownership and mark it as editable so no one else can modify it until it's reviewed. The negative is if I have 4 structural engineers working on columns and I make columns editable so I can just work on it, I lock the other 3 out from adding anything to the column work set. So it's a plus and a minus. The owner is the owner, whoever actually makes it editable, which is me in this case because I'm creating these. Borrowers would be somebody that borrowed it. Open, meaning yes, it's open. And then visible in all views, meaning the work sets can be viewed in any of your views in the project browser. Now, typically editable is going to be set to no and owner is going to be blank when we start to use this central file. But because we're creating this, this is what it looks like. You can add more work sets, you can add less, but once they're all created as a standard, go ahead and click OK. Now that creates the work sets. The work sets can actually be seen from the drop down on the very top on the Collaborate tab. Also, the same menu is on the very bottom of your screen as well, so you don't have to keep going back to the Collaborate tab. The rule is, whatever you're working on for that work set, make sure that work set is active, such as if I'm working on a floor, I'll make floors active, so that way whatever I add now to the floor, it's grouped or tagged into the actual floor work set. Now, the last step to creating the central file is to save this as a central file. So we go to the large R in the upper left, Save As, Project. Revit understands, because we created a work set, that this is now a central file. So what I would do, I would call this central file dash whatever the name of your project is. As you can see, we already have one created, central file 1601. We're going to use that for additional lessons. Now, whenever you create a central file, there's also a backup folder in case it becomes corrupted, you can restore. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it central file. Do not overwrite the central file 1601 because we're going to use that later. So with the name of the central file, click Save. That file then could be placed on the server or somewhere else that the IT administrator would want to place this. After it's actually created, the last step you as a user would do is relinquish all mine, meaning I want to give back the editable rights for all of those work groups that I created. And then if I wanted to synchronize, I could say synchronize with the central server. The first sync option allows me to modify and add notes. The second one just syncs, and I can just sync. That'll sync all the changes back to my central file. If you click Work Sets on the left, you'll actually see editable is no, and no one owns these. So really now we're ready to actually start using the central file. The next step would be create the user copies of the actual file itself. Go ahead and click OK. So as a review, we discussed work sharing. We discussed different ways to work share, and we discussed probably one of the best collaborative ways is to use work sharing and work sets within a Revit project. Here, you actually create a central file, set up work sets for different users to work on the actual parts of the Revit model, and then once the central file is created, the users actually have their own copy of it, which they work in their own copy but synchronize changes back to the central file and then out to all the users. We created the central file, set up work sets, and then prepared the actual central file by relinquishing all control back to it for the user creation of Revit files next.